Shalom. In our look into the characters in the Bible that exhibit the character of the Messiah, and thus are a foreshadowing of Messiah, we come to Noah. Noah's name itself means the one who will give us rest from our work, from the toil of our hands, a toil which is from the ground which the Lord has cursed because of the sin of Adam. Noah is a blameless man in his time, and thus all the earth will be repopulated via Noah through his 3 sons. We note that the earth is ready for judgment because the whole earth at Noah's time was filled with violence. And that term violence in the Hebrew is the word Hamas. And this Hamas actually signaled to God that the earth was totally corrupt. To those of this world, it wasn't totally corrupt, but to God, it was totally corrupt. And that is a point, isn't it? It is not what this world thinks or says. It is what God thinks and says. And that is the point here with Noah. Things had to be seen from God's point of view. And from God's point of view, the world at this time was ready for the judgment of God. As we will see in a minute, where God will indeed judge the earth with the worldwide flood. And here's we get to identify exactly which Messiah Noah is a picture of. For Noah came to save the human race. That was his mission in life. He doesn't save all the humans that are alive, but he saves the race itself. But you notice that is done only through a remnant of 8 souls. Noah himself and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. A rather distinct and limited group of people, a very small remnant of all the people who were on the face of the earth at the time. And not even all these 8 were blameless, but they are identified with or as part of the one who was blameless. And how were they identified as being of the one who was blameless? They were identified as being in or part of his house. The plain picture painted here is that if you were not of or in his house, Noah's house, a blameless house, you were not saved. You then were judged by God as not his and thus not worthy of salvation. Now, does that mean that no one else would have been let into the ark if they would have come and wanted in? No, not at all. Because Noah knew the heart of God. And God's heart says in 1 Timothy 2, 3-7, paraphrased, that God's desire that no man perish, but all would come to the truth and be saved. In this case, come to know and be saved from the flood of God's judgment on the earth. And in that understanding of God's heart, they would have been let in. They would have, in effect, been grafted into Noah's house, Noah's family, and thus God's family. How do we know this? Because that is also what Yeshua said through the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 2, where the message is clear. Some of those Paul was talking to had been Gentiles, as stated by Paul, those without God and thus without hope. But now, in Messiah Yeshua, they have been grafted into Israel and are now members of the covenant with God given to Israel, for Israel, and only Israel. It is the very reason Peter quotes Leviticus 11:44-47, and specifically verses 44 and 45 in 1 Peter 1:16. You shall be holy, for I am holy, where God is instructing his people how to be set apart to him, and thus set apart from this fallen world of the adversary of God. And in Leviticus, it is all about distinctions between God and this fallen world. And in this very specific case, this distinction is in association with the dietary laws. And that is the very obvious message of Noah too, isn't it? After all, when asked about why he was building a boat in a landlocked area, didn't Noah respond with why he was doing so, making a distinction between this world and God? And thus, wouldn't Noah offer an invitation to all those who inquired as to come and join him in God's salvation? But God knew no one would follow Noah, and thus Genesis 7:13. And only Noah and his family would be saved. Because the iniquity, the lawlessness, the Hamas of the world was full and required judgment. And thus Noah here is identified as the one who would bring salvation to his people. In all the work and witnessing that Noah and his family did for those 100 years that they built the ark in an area that had no sea to float that ark on, in all the ridicule, chiding, and scoffing, that is, all the disbelief of Noah in his mission that the world showed to Noah and thus to God, in those 100 years of constructing the ark would now, in the flood, prove Noah right, prove God right, in the witness that he, Noah, gave. And now the rains start and the people think Noah's not so dizzy after all. But now it is too late, for the doors of the ark is closed by God himself. And the world is on the outside. And to juxtaposition the people's response to all this, even the animals of the field that listened to God were brought into the ark. And God himself brought those animals to the ark. Noah didn't even have to go out and get them. They all came on their own by the leading of God. The only ones Noah had to go and get were the animals that would be given up to God on the altar of God after the flood was over, as a thank offering to God and as acknowledgement to God that it was He, God alone, who saved the world and everything in it. Not that He saved everything and everybody that was in the world, but that He saved all that were destined to be saved in the world, all that were His from this evil and corrupt world. And after all, isn't that the very picture of Yeshua, Messiah ben Joseph, the suffering servant of God, the one who was beloved by the people who knew Him, but was despised and persecuted and hunted down for death by those who were the power brokers of this fallen world, the kingdom of the adversary of God? Isn't that exactly what the gospel tells us too? Are they not parallel in their message? And are not both Noah and Yeshua both given over to the will of the Heavenly Father? Do they now both do the will of their Heavenly Father? Are they not both faithful to that will of their Heavenly Father? And don't they both successfully complete the will of their Heavenly Father and thus are successful in the mission they were given? Yes, to all the above. And thus Noah is a prefigurement and a foreshadowing of the suffering servant of God, God's Messiah ben Joseph, the salvation of the world, but not salvation of all the people in the world, but salvation for all those who trust in Him enough to follow Him and be aligned with Him, to be wholly set apart unto Him and thus be in His family. Not just saying you are in His family, but actually being in His family by alignment with Him and thus His family. And then you too will float away above the judgment of this world and settle again into God's kingdom right here on earth with Messiah ben Joseph, being unscathed by the judgment of Messiah ben David, the king and ultimately fair judge of everything, and then live in Messiah's kingdom, God's world, forever. Shalom.
Yeshua, you're all in all to those who believe. Believe your word and live your life for all the world to see. And for those who don't, you judge eternally. You lived and died and rose up from the grave for all to see.